Bjarte Bogsnes has a long international career, both in finance and HR. He is a pioneer in the beyond budgeting movement and helped numerous companies globally getting started on a beyond budgeting journey. He headed up the implementation of beyond budgeting at Equinor, formerly Statoil, a Norwegian energy company operating in 36 countries, and led a similar initiative at Borealis, one of the companies that inspired the beyond budgeting model. Bjarte is chairman of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable and is a popular international business speaker and beyond budgeting coach. He is a winner of a Harvard Business Review/McKinsey Management Innovation Award. Dave Richards is a partner of Agile 2 Academy. He is an author, speaker, and facilitator of strategic innovation leadership, with a passion for inspiring, enabling, and empowering innovative people, teams, and enterprises to achieve amazing results. Dr. Dave co-founded the MIT Innovation Lab, which led to important insights shared in his best-selling book, The 7 Sins of Innovation, a strategic model for entrepreneurship, which elevates the thinking on this crucial subject to the highest level, according to Roger Lacey, Chief Strategy Officer, 3M. Before becoming a consultant, Dave has a long history of global executive P&L responsibility at the billion-dollar level, launching and leading their data products, taking Nortel networks into the Internet age. For the past decade, Dave has served various enterprises as a board director or advisor, is a chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society and Fellow of the Royal Society for the Arts and the Institute of Directors. Dave has a PhD in mathematical psychology and neuroscience from the University of Toronto. Cliff Berg is managing partner of Agile 2 Academy. As a successful tech entrepreneur, he was co-founder and CTO of Digital Focus, a startup that grew from 2 to 200 people in 5 years, and was known for its success in rapidly building high-reliability, internet-facing mission-critical systems for companies like FedEx, McKesson, United Overseas Bank, and many others. It was acquired in 2006. Cliff's 2006 textbook, High Assurance Design, documents many of the engineering and agility lessons learned. Since then, Cliff has helped with more than 10 Agile or DevOps transformations, and is a DevOps trainer and subject matter expert. In 2020, Cliff assembled the global Agile 2 team of 15 experts in program management, system engineering, product design, and other disciplines to reimagine Agile in an organization-wide and more business-centric context, and was the lead author of the Agile 2 book published by Wiley. Stephen Villa Escuza is a partner of Agile 2 Academy. He is a seasoned executive who pioneered IBM's first lean manufacturing operation. At Raytheon Hughes Aircraft, he led enterprise-wide quality and continuous improvement initiatives as the corporate lean champion and Six Sigma deployment champion. In that role, he conducted more than 100 rapid improvement workshops and built the communications infrastructure for company-wide transformation. Subsequently, as senior consultant and VP of Business Development at Oriole and BMGI, he secured more than 150 clients across 6 continents, managing complex multi-year global deployments in manufacturing, technology, financial services, healthcare, and government. His current focus is as co-developer of Constructive Agility, a breakthrough methodology that moves organizations from task management to outcome achievement through leadership training, Agile 2 methods, language-based coordination, and commitment practices.
Bjarte, what does beyond budgeting fundamentally challenge about traditional management?
It is about so much more than budgets. It's about challenging traditional management. Number one, that you can't trust people and employees, and number two, that the future is predictable and plannable. And this is not true, and this is what we are challenging in beyond budgeting. You also have to change the budgeting process and the budgeting mindset, because that sits at the core of traditional management. People and leadership is a big part of Beyond Budgeting. The model consists of 12 principles. There are 6 on leadership. Moving to the management process side, we talk about targets, forecasts, resource allocation, performance evaluation, rewards, and also the rhythm or cadence of all of these processes. Ambition to action is my former employer Equinor's version of Beyond Budgeting. Equinor is one of Scandinavia's largest companies, an energy company. Ambition to action builds partly on the good sides of the so-called balanced scorecard, which is its strategy translation process, and on the Beyond Budgeting principles. And it translates strategy into strategic objectives, risks, actions to achieve these objectives, to mitigate risk, and also measurement through indicators. And last but not least, a translation into what does this mean for you and me and the teams that we are in. There are around 900 ambition to actions in the organization, and each of these covers 5 so-called perspectives across the stages I just talked about. So that's the very short version of ambition to action. It's one way of doing Beyond Budgeting, not the only way. That's important.
Sounds like that touches a little bit on the topic of translating strategies, which you talk about.
Well, let me start with what you shouldn't do. The simple but wrong way is top-down cascading. The problem with that is that in case of ambition to action, if your own ambition to action only becomes a landing ground for instruction from above, then the ownership, the motivation, the commitment walks out the door. Instead of a top-down cascading, there is a level-by-level translation. Every unit would look at the level above, look at neighboring units, and look at what does their ambition look like when it comes to ambition levels, direction. And then the team have a deep and good discussion. What does our ambition to actually need to look like to support this? There is full transparency. Everybody can see everybody else's ambition to action with a few exceptions. So there's no way to hide with a stupid ambition to action.
But it also sounds like transparency helps to create an incentive as well, to create that alignment and that coherence.
Let me first address the issue of coherence more generally. So a coherence between what is said and what is done. If we then address incentives in this context, it doesn't help that management is talking equally loud about we and collaboration and everybody in the same boat and so on. If moving to management processes and rewards, incentives, if that is all about individual bonus.
Being on time and on budget is a very common criteria for success in organizations. And recognizing that sometimes you have to be on time, time matters, but is the obsession with on time and on budget as the metric for everything, does that create a perverse incentive that you think corrupts behavior?
Well, I think the paradox here is that when we talk about time and cost, we often talk about that's typically applied on projects. And the interesting thing is that when these projects are in the evaluation phase before they are decided, the discussion is much more on value. And when you move to execution and follow-up, then the focus narrows to time and cost, right? And that is a problem because, I mean, what if there are things you can do that in isolation increases cost, but in total improves value a lot? Or if things should delay things a bit, but again, it would radically improve value. This gets even worse if there is incentives linked to hitting cost and time targets.
Time and budget are easy to measure. I'm wondering how important you think it is to have line of sight from strategy through execution so people can actually think in terms of value instead of time and budget.
Well, I think it's line of sight is important, not just in terms of value, but in general. We recommend management processes that empower the organization. But if you are weak on line of sight and direction, if you are weak on values, you actually, unfortunately, have to be a bit careful with that autonomy.
I wonder if financial targets even make sense in many cases. Sometimes they're important, especially to investors, but a lot of situations, maybe that's not the right criteria. If people have line of sight to strategy and objectives, why do they need time and budget criteria?
We should ask ourselves, why do we do it? We have targets to provide direction and motivation, but there are many ways of creating direction and motivation. And let me now emphasize that when I'm criticizing targets, those are the targets I'm criticizing. Very annual, very detailed, very top down. I'm much more relaxed about targets that people set for themselves, because that's a big difference. But the other reason why people say we need targets is performance evaluation. But think about it, when we are sitting in the fall and trying to set the target for next year, we are sitting there trying to guess what does good performance look like 12 months down the road. And the answer becomes 29.2, that everything shall be measured against. And that's meaningless, because again, if the purpose is performance evaluation, at which point in time do we have the best insight and knowledge about what was good performance? Is that through making guesses up front, or is it looking at the facts on the table afterwards?
I think this is a foundational idea of beyond budgeting, that there's a distinction between a forecast, a target, and an allocation.
Yeah, and that's a key part of beyond budgeting, and also a great way to get started. What you talked about is a practical, logical, tested, more finance-oriented way of getting started. And the budget has these three purposes. We make budgets to set targets, financial targets, sales targets, production targets. At the same time, this budget shall be a kind of a forecast of what next year could look like in terms of profit or cash flow. And last but not least, as you say, it is a resource allocation mechanism. But here lies the problem. Because what happens when we move into a budget process, and let's assume that upstairs finance, they want to understand next year's profit. So they start on the revenue side and ask responsible people, what are your numbers for next year? But everybody knows that what I'm sending upstairs now will most likely come back to me as a target for next year. Everybody wants to reach their target, so yeah, we know what happens. Moving to the cost side, operational cost investments, the same people are asked, what are your best numbers for next year? But everybody knows that this is my only chance of getting access to resources for next year. And some might also remember that 20% cut from last year. And that memory and that insight might also do something to the level of numbers submitted. And these times the numbers would typically go the other way. This is actually a serious problem, not just because it destroys the quality of numbers, but also because it stimulates behavior that is at least borderline unethical. The lowballing, the gaming, the sandbagging, the resource hoarding, these are not the kind of behaviors we would like to see between colleagues. These people are just responding to the system that we have designed for them to operate in. If we want to change behaviors, it's not about fixing people, it's about fixing systems, which again changes behavior. And this is exactly what Beyond Budgeting is doing here, because what we recommend is to separate these three things into three different processes, because they are different things. A target, for instance, that's an aspiration. It's what we want to happen. While a forecast is an expectation. It's what we think will happen, whether we like what we see or not, brutally honest, the expected outcome. And last but not least, resource allocation is about the optimization of scarce resources. And by separating, we can now start to improve each one in ways impossible when it was all bundled in one process and one set of numbers. We can, for instance, as a few examples, allow targets to be more ambitious than forecast, which it typically should be. We can start to think in sports terms. I've yet to meet a soccer team saying that the ambition for next season is to score 39 goals and get 42 points. Those are budget goals, and they don't think like that. They think in relative terms. It's all about doing well against peers and hopefully better than everybody else. We can then work on getting the bias out of forecasting by getting across that the forecast in this model is just the forecast. It's not a bid into a target negotiation, different process. It's not an application for money, different process. And last but not least, we can start to find much better ways of managing cost. When we have separated the three, we can organize each of them on a cadence that much better reflect not just the business we are in, but also each purpose. We wouldn't change targets that often if we have them. Forecasting would be changed more frequently, and resource allocation, as we might come back to, will take place much more continuously. And the beauty with starting here, and among the maybe 50 companies I've helped getting started over the years, this is where most of them started out. The beauty is that for everybody saying that you can't operate without a budget, here we still do what that budget tried to do for us, the three things. But having separate, we can do each one in much better ways.
So Bjarte, people in general and leaders in particular struggle to trust other people. What are your suggestions for establishing greater trust?
The general situation is that, yes, there might be some incidents or situations where trust is abused, but is it a general pattern or is it exceptions? And very often it is exceptions. The problem is that it's not treated as exceptions. Because if you show trust in an organization, someone will abuse it. The issue is, how do executives respond? And the simple but wrong response is to punish everybody because somebody did something wrong, right? Everybody back to the old budgeting process, for instance, because this trusting doesn't work. That is simple but wrong. Doesn't take much leadership. The right thing to do, which takes more leadership, is to have that very firm talk with those involved, that manager, that team, and let it have the necessary consequences. But in general, I think in most organizations, most employees can be trusted. The fact that there might be a small minority that can't be, you cannot let that small minority drive the design of your management model. That must be driven by your majority view on people, and then you need to find other ways of dealing with these guys.
What else can leaders do to encourage an organizational culture that's people-centric and based on trust as a core requirement for any effective relationships?
How you set targets, letting people set their own targets, how you do forecasting, letting people do forecasting for themselves more than for corporate. Resource allocation, letting people make much more of these cost decisions on their own instead of being instructed from above. It's about how you do performance evaluation, having a holistic evaluation instead of just comparing two numbers, actual versus budget, and then conclude on good performance, which is a very narrow and mechanical way of evaluating performance. And last, it is about incentives and letting incentives be more team or company driven.
How can we create the right kind of incentives, ones that support really adaptive and effective performance, rather than all of this behavior around gaming the system?
I mean, what we recommend is some kind of collective bonus schemes. It could, for instance, be a scheme that is driven by how the organization is performing versus competitors. It could also be taken a bit further out in the organization. For instance, if you team bonuses or business area bonuses. But what is important, if you decide to take it further down, split that company bonus into team or business area, then there cannot be big dependencies between, for instance, business areas. If there are dependencies, the kind of potential positive motivation effect in the business area coming out highest will completely be wiped out by that pissed off feeling, among the other business areas who will say that, I mean, we helped you guys to deliver what you delivered, and how come we should get less? That common bonus scheme is not meant to kind of motivate individuals. It is about creating a more indirect motivation, about fairness, that we are in this together. If you look at what most research is telling us about what really motivates people in knowledge organizations, this is much more about mastery, autonomy, purpose, belonging, and so on, which is about leadership and not managerial laziness.
Traditional budgeting is periodic, typically an annual cycle of resource allocation. Beyond budgeting advocates something very different, a more continuous, dynamic approach to funding. Can you please talk about what that looks like in practice?
Imagine that it's April and your car just broke down. You have to buy a new car, and you go to your bank to ask for a bank loan, and you're politely told that, sorry, that department is only open in October. But what is the budget process? Well, the bank is open once a year. That's in the fall, during the budget process. I think it makes sense to separate between projects and investments here, where you can kind of calculate the business case and so on, and you have very distinct decision points, and more operational costs, admin costs. How do you manage travel costs without a budget? When it comes to investments projects, our recommendation is to let the bank be open all year long. The line should always be able to forward a project for approval at any time when that project is mature for approval. A yes or a no depends on two things. How good is your project, and can we afford it as things looks today, right? So it's not that difficult on projects. The criteria we make decisions on doesn't necessarily change, but the timing changes radically. It's a bit more challenging when we come to operational cost, but here we have a menu of different options. The last two guardrails we recommend, which a lot of companies have in place already, even if they have budgets, is some kind of mandates or kind of frames that you cannot make a decision above this amount before you need to go one level up, nothing to do with budgets. And the other is kind of spending guidelines. Again, an example from Equinor. There's no travel budgets, but there is a principle that if you fly in Europe, you fly coach. If you fly intercontinental, you can fly business. Has nothing to do with travel budgets. It just helps people to make decisions.
You've explored the ideas of the Agile community a lot. Could you talk about that and how they complement each other or don't?
Well, if you look at the Agile manifesto, you'll immediately see that there are similarities, like, for instance, responding to change instead of following a plan. But there is a but here. And what I'm now going to say is it's no criticism of Agile. I've been a big fan since day one. I've been involved with this community since day one. The first international Agile conference took place in Sardinia, and I was actually there talking about beyond budgeting. So no criticism, just an observation. And this is about the idea of scaling Agile. What executives upstairs observed in those pioneer years, that was better projects, better outcomes, more engaged employees. And who can be against that? Then this stuff started to scale, and one day maybe it started to have implications for executive beliefs and behaviors, and then it wasn't that fun anymore. The other issue has to do with language. You can't scale Agile using exactly the same language, words, frameworks that made so much sense where it all started. So you need a language here that these executives can relate to and understand, and we offer that language in Beyond Budgeting. They understand what we talk about. But I think the last reason is the most important one. Again, it goes back to the birthplace. Agile was not intended to be a way of running an enterprise. So when you try to scale Agile, these holes in Agile become visible. All the things that executive wants to understand when they hear about business agility, that Agile can't answer. But Beyond Budgeting can, because through the management processes here, we can explain to these managers what business agility will mean when it comes to target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, performance evaluation, rewards, and the cadence of these processes. The combination of Agile and Beyond Budgeting is a great one. And I would argue there can be no Agile transformation without Beyond Budgeting. And that's where we are today, where maybe this is one reason why, or many, why Agile has been struggling, because there's so much missing when it comes to scaling.
Bjarte, could you talk a little bit about the role that tools and technologies might play, in helping organizations to operationalize the ideas of Beyond Budgeting?
Technology is important in at least in two ways. One is that it can create one version of the truth, which is important. The other one is that It can create that transparency that is so important. Both of these is very hard to achieve without a good system behind your process. But having said that, and I'm not saying that technology is not important, in no way, but we seldom find technology as the kind of key barrier for going beyond budgeting, because that barrier typically sits a different place, namely between the ears of people. It goes back to how we think about these things.
I think you mentioned in a prior conversation about the importance of not layering processes on top.
Because a lot of this stuff, if we take OKRs as a good example, that is stuff that companies put on top of all the other management boxes they already have. Here, beyond budgeting is different because it requires that you actually remove a lot of the old stuff and that you change the way you think. I would rather see something that grows steadily, sustainably, year by year, like beyond budgeting has been doing for so many years, than something that quickly can become a boom and bust. I don't think we will talk that much about OKRs in 10 years' time. Like Agile, it's been somewhat corrupted through all the certification and all the kind of that we now see. And I mean, people that used to be Agile coaches, suddenly they are OKR coaches. And we made a clear decision many years ago. We will never offer a beyond budgeting certification. I mean, I'm running a number of 2-day masterclasses, but okay, how can I sign off after 2 days that you guys have understood beyond budgeting? Absolutely, and there's a lot of great stuff that I really love with OKRs, and very many similarities with.
You said that OKRs might not be in the vernacular in 10 years because the idea has been packaged and kind of corrupted by certifications. But what about the core ideas of having clear objectives and clear targets for outcomes? Do you feel those core ideas are important?
Absolutely, and there's a lot of great stuff that I really love with OKRs, and very many similarities with beyond budgeting, like the translation principle. So it's not cascaded; it's translated. That you have this around the cadence that is not an annual process. You could challenge why should a quarter be so magical? I mean, it could be there's no link to bonus, which was also very important, and also transparency. That if you take the role of a manager, I mean, it's you are a more trusted manager. You make decisions more continuously. You do a lot of this stuff much more for yourself than to feed corporate demands, target setting, forecasting, and so on. But it's not necessarily easier, and this is important, because traditional management, including budgeting, is so much easier for everybody involved. Tech managers, if you're a manager who don't like to make decisions, and actually there are some of them, then the more detailed your cost budget is, for instance, the better, because then somebody has made these decisions for you. Going beyond budgeting makes things a bit more fluid, a bit more moving, a bit more uncertain. You have to live with ambiguity, you have to accept uncertainty, you have to embrace uncertainty, and be comfortable with it. So it takes more competence for everybody involved, which can be scary up front. But what we see over and over again is that what is scary today is not scary tomorrow, because it works. So even if we had some skeptical people back 20 years ago when we went beyond budgeting in Equinor, I don't think you will find many, if any, who today want to go back to the old way. It's not just good for your bottom line directly, but also indirectly, because you get more engaged employees, you get more popular as an employer. Equinor has quite a big presence in the US, and the company recruits almost only from its US competitors, and people want to work for Equinor because they know that this company operates in a different way.
Looking ahead, what excites you about the evolution of adaptive management practices?
Well, what really fascinates me is that it will become mainstream. And I don't care if it will be called beyond budgeting or business agility or whatever. In 15, 20 years' time, maybe earlier, when we look back at what was mainstream management thinking in 2025, I think we will smile. And here, organizations, they have a choice. They can choose to be early movers and get the competitive advantage, or they can choose to be dragged into this as one of the last ones.
What final advice would you give organizations that have begun to recognize the limitations of command and control, but still feel a little daunted about the transformations required by beyond budgeting?
Well, if you find this a bit big and a bit scary, first of all, I mean, take a look at that separation of the budget purposes, which is a simple and not scary way of getting started. And beyond that, reflect a little bit on the risk picture here. So, Stephen, let's assume that you are the skeptic. Cost will explode, anarchy. So we don't agree, but we agree that there are two scenarios. And let's start the risk picture in your scenario. And I would call the downside risk in that scenario is next to zero. Because if you are right, we can go back to the old model tomorrow. Not a single soul will have forgotten. Moving to my scenario, look at that huge upside potential that so many organizations have tapped into through performing so much better. It's not a coincidence that very few organizations go back once they have started.
I see a really interesting parallel between some of what you've said about beyond budgeting and a key learning from the MIT Innovation Lab. Through discussions in the lab, we saw that organizations struggle to truly learn lessons from mistakes in a way that makes the learning stick. Often, leaders are too quick to want to brush off the mistakes and move on rather than facing the excruciating process of digging through the entrails of the mistakes, which often requires deeply analyzing the behavior and mindsets of everyone involved. Also, people, including key leaders, move on, replaced by inexperienced people who may repeat the same mistakes. For me, there's a very interesting parallel between the organizational learning issue and the fact that beyond budgeting encourages leaders to learn about their financial reality by looking at actual, real, present financial data, rather than wasting enormous amounts of time and energy speculating and playing games regarding forecasts of the future. So Bjarte, would you please comment on that?
Of course, I mean, we are not saying that you shouldn't try to look forward, but you need to do it in an unbiased way with no kind of hidden agendas of playing with the numbers, and it should be forecasting that you mainly do for yourself. But you need to realize that it is uncertain. My advice is often, why don't you put that effort into becoming more agile and adaptive instead of being better at forecasting, so that you can respond fast when stuff happens, instead of spending so much time trying to predict when you know that what you predict most likely will be wrong. It's very crowded on the technology innovation arena because everybody is there. The management innovation arena is not yet crowded because it's scary, which is actually good news for brave companies that they are to explore and embrace this, because they can get the dramatic competitive advantages by being early movers. I have a slide in my presentation where I have got logos of all the companies that have gone beyond budgeting globally, quite a busy slide. And I know that when people see it, the first thing they are looking for is, are there other companies in my business on that list? And if there aren't, then this is scary. Can't do it because nobody else in my business is doing it. But if this was not about management innovation, but about some kind of technology thing that you were about to get hold of, the last thing you would want was anybody else in your business up there. You would like to be the first. So we are so schizophrenic on innovation that is fascinating.